Welcome to the educational research section of www.happynumbers.org. Today we are going to take a look at an overview of the different types of educational research. Okay, here you can see we have types of educational research, and there are generally two main types. One is quantitative research methodologies, and we're going to discuss these in a minute, and the other is qualitative research methodologies. Basically, quantitative research methodologies reports its results in terms of numbers, some types of statistical analysis. Qualitative research methodologies rely more on interviews, surveys, and narrative data, but we will talk about these. Now, under quantitative research methodologies, the kind that uses numbers, we have experimental and non-experimental. Under experimental, we have true experimental, and we have quasi-experimental, and we have pre-experimental. We also have single-case experimental designs, and I'm not going to iterate these now. There will be a video on each of these. But this is all under quantitative research methodology, experimental, and these are the types of experimental research methodologies. Then we have quantitative research methodologies, non-experimental. We have descriptive research, correlational research, which talks about the strength and direction of relationships between variables, comparative research, survey research, and ex post facto. And again, this is just an overview. There'll be videos describing each of these different kinds also. Pardon me. Under the qualitative research methodologies, we have the interactive, and under interactive we have ethnography, phenomenologic, case study, grounded theory, critical studies, and again we will have videos explaining these. And under the qualitative there is non-interactive, concept analysis and historical analysis. So, for now, or for this video, we're going to take a look at the different approaches of qualitative and quantitative research methodologies. These are two very different epistemologies. And so they become simultaneous concerns or competing methodologies as to the best way to examine reality. They are very different research designs and approaches and assumptions. Their assumptions are very different. The design structures the strategy used for how a study is conducted. So a particular research design will dictate whether it will be quantitative or qualitative analysis. And they are generally categorized according to how data is collected and analyzed and the purpose of the research. So let's take a look. We're going to compare quantitative and qualitative. Let's take a look at a description of both of them. Well, quantitative research, a description of quantitative research, procedures, the sequential steps are established before the study begins. There's an attempt to structure, design, to reduce error and subjectivity. The researcher is detached from the research, and it is disciplined objectivity. Qualitative is very, very different. It begins with an initial tentative idea that continues to evolve, unlike the quantitative where the sequential steps are written down beforehand. The design emerges as the data are collected and analyzed, and the design is flexible. It can be changing throughout the entire research, very different than the quantitative research methodology with the approach to control variables, things like that. And the researcher is involved to one degree or another in quantitative research. The researcher can be an observer, or the researcher actually in some quantitative designs becomes a participant. And it is disciplined subjectivity is the assumption, whereas disciplined objectivity is the assumption here. So they're two very, very different types, epistemologies, ways of finding out what reality is. There's the story of the Zen master walking along with his student, and they come to a river, and they're crossing the bridge on the river, and the student says to the master, Master, tell me what the river is like. And the Zen master picks the student up and throws him into the river. So, of course, become part of the river. That's the sort of the qualitative methodology. You can't understand behavior unless you are be part of that behavior. Whereas the quantitative research says that you must be removed and you must control. So let's take a look at the purpose of both kinds. The purpose of the quantitative, the one that uses numbers, is to explain, control, and predict phenomena. The purpose of the qualitative is to understand a social phenomenon from the participant's perspective. The purpose is in the quantitative, the purpose is to establish relationships between measurable variables by intervening with some kind of intervention. In the qualitative, there is no attempt to intervene or control for anything. Quantitative is theory testing, prediction, establishing facts, hypotheses, hypothesis testing. In qualitative, phenomenon studies as it is or was in its natural setting. Quantitative is focused, outcome-oriented. Qualitative, describing multiple realities, developing deep understanding, capturing everyday life and human perspectives. The difference in assumptions. Quantitative, there is a single knowable reality that can be defined and measured and quantified. Qualitative, there are multiple realities that are context and or person dependent. Quantitative, the researcher is removed from the research for objectivity. Qualitative, to truly understand the reality, the research must become part of the reality. Key concepts in both types. Quantitative has variables, independent, dependent, operationalized definitions. Reliability and validity are big concepts. Statistical significance, replication, and prediction. Qualitative, contextualization, the context is important. It's the process that is very, very important. Extensive field notes. Triangulation, an important concept. Triangulation means collecting data from about the same thing from different sources. So you might get data about X from interviews, from existing records, and from surveys, and you triangulate. That sort of validates the data. There is an insider-outsider perspective. Meaning is of chief concern, and it's interested in judgments and deep understandings. In terms of sample selection, quantitative, randomized sampling if possible is the best. Control of extraneous variables, and sample size matters, but it must be representative of the population. That's the most important, that the sample is representative of the population. Qualitative research doesn't have to, the sample does not have to represent the population at large, and the sample can be small. Qualitative, again, is looking at understandings of some existing groups or things that are going on, not generalizations to populations at large. Methodologies, quantitative, experiments, standardized instruments, structured interviews, structured observations, isolates variables for control. Qualitative, participant observation, open-ended interviews, document review, researcher as the instrument, no attempt to control for things, attempt to understand meanings in specific context. Differences in design. Predetermined design in quantitative, structured time frame, predetermined questions or hypothesis, uses hypothesis testing. Qualitative, exploration over undetermined amount of time, flexible, open-ended, hypothesis development, not so much hypothesis testing. Data collection. Quantitative, Statistical, descriptive statistics, inferential statistics, operationally defined variables. Qualitative, very descriptive. The data is very descriptive in nature, narrative data, generally known numbers, based on observations, extensive field notes, documents, interaction with participants, collects face-to-face data, interviews, focus groups, things like that. And data analysis. Deductive in nature, general to specific, and statistical data analysis, whether it's descriptive or inferential. Qualitative, ongoing, the data analysis is ongoing throughout the entire research. Inductive, specific facts leading to generalization. Triangulation, which I mentioned before. A great deal of coding of the data for concepts that keep repeating themselves, and produces verbal narrative and synthesis. So these are two very different existing epistemologies, or ways of gaining knowledge about the reality of the world. Quantitative and qualitative. And we'll talk more about these later. Okay, well, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.